Welcome to the PowerBack podcast. PowerBack is a teen dating abuse outreach program operated by a Partnership for Change, a nonprofit agency dedicated to ending domestic violence and dating abuse. Visit our website at apartnershipforchange.org to learn more about how law enforcement, school counselors, social service agencies, and many more can benefit from our programs in New Jersey. We're here today to talk about the Gabby Petito documentary on Netflix. Give our reaction to it, our take on it. Some of the things that we find most informational and beneficial to anybody who's really trying to learn about domestic violence, the real world implications of these things. And let's just jump right into it.
Okay. All right. I guess, I wanted to just maybe start with like initial reactions to the documentary. I don't know. I think it's really important to tell her story. I think people need to know that people really do die when they are in dangerous, abusive relationships, especially without a safety plan. And so Gabby is obviously one story. This got a lot of national attention because there was a lot of, searching for her body and things like that. And, there was a lot of involvement by the press and things like that. But this stuff happens all the time, every day. It happens here in New Jersey. It happens, wherever people live all the time. And so I think that's what people need to know is that there's a lot of risk associated with being in abusive relationships when there's no safety plan. And it's during the breakup, that's when things get to be the most dangerous. And I think that's probably what happened in Gabby's case, especially, from what we saw in the documentary. So that was my first initial reaction, is that it's really important for people to know that, that this stuff happens all the time.
And just to give a really brief overview, I mean, this was national news. I know a lot of people do know about Gabby Petito. There may be some who don't. And if you haven't seen the documentary, we do suggest watching it a lot. It's really, really good. It's really well done. She was a young woman. How old was she?
She was 22.
22 at the time of her murder.
Yep.
She was traveling across the United States, across a couple states, I guess, with her boyfriend at the time, Brian Laundrie. It seemed increasingly more and more like from the people around her that things were getting bad, that she was becoming more and more isolated by him, that she wasn't happy, that they were fighting. And eventually, yes, that is what happened. She was murdered and was found a long time after, a couple of weeks after. Yeah. So anyway, that's a very brief overview, but we do recommend watching the documentary. That said, like you said, there were signs, and one of the people that they speak to in the beginning of the documentary is her friend. Yeah. It was her best friend that she had met on Bumble together, and they hit it off, and they just seemed so like, naturally compatible as friends. It was really nice to see, and there was a lot of like TikToks that they showed of them dancing and having fun and stuff, and so it was really like, it felt like a very genuine thing. So even she was able to see. I remember her saying like, they were just so close, but Brian was getting jealous of the two of them hanging out.
Yes.
And I remember at one point, and this was really telling, and I don't know that she recognized it as a warning sign of dating abuse. I think she just said that it was like just weird, like it was just a weird thing. But I remember her saying like, he just felt like a dad watching us. Like if he happened to be when they were hanging out, she was like, it just felt like he was like different, like watching over them in a way that wasn't like, he wasn't like a friend of theirs, that he was watching over
trying
them,
to be
being controlling, like he was like supervision to them. And what do you kind of like make of that too? Because that was like a very, it seemed, I feel like it seems to us like a very clear warning sign, but like, yeah, what did you make of that?
Well, I mean, if you think somebody is weird or off, you wouldn't necessarily think of that as a warning sign. But if they are almost monitoring what you're doing, and it seems like you have to watch yourself or else something bad is going to happen, then that's where the controlling becomes borderline abusive. Although at the time she didn't know any of what she knows now, but that was really telling. I think another thing that she brought up, I don't know if you remember this part, when she was supposed to go out with Gabby, and Brian took Gabby's wallet so that she couldn't go out.
Yes.
And like that was another something that's like something that you may not think like so obvious. That's a form of abuse, right? Because you're taking somebody's ability to use their money, to have access to their wallet, to be able to leave their place of residence, right? So like those are kind of some early warning signs that stood out to me.
Yeah, and it wasn't just that they were fighting. It was like he took the wallet, and she was texting her friend, I think, saying like, that was interesting too, because she was texting her friend saying, you know, he did this, but it's okay. I think she was kind of almost like wavering a little bit, like trying to defend him, but trying to say like, you know, that she needed help, like that things were getting bad, you know. But I'm not sure that maybe she knew how to talk about it exactly.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, and
so it made it really hard.
And I think it's also like it's important to know like we don't. There's of course no blame on the friend for not like
no,
doing anything
of
about
course
it.
not.
Like this is, you know, but it's really why we do what we do, because we know that people who are in abusive relationships are more likely to go to their friends than a parent, a teacher, or somebody else. And so you know, knowing these early warning signs or just things to look out for, you could really save a friend's life if you're able to like come up with a safety plan with them, or you know, identify that the relationship isn't healthy or that it's abusive. So you know, it's really good to know these things.
And you know, aside from the friend, and again, it's not about blaming her. It's just it's this hope of that, you know, the more that we educate on these signs, that people will be able to pick up on it and help prevent their friend. Obviously, that's a lot harder said than done.
Yeah.
However, there is the other scene in the documentary where you see at one point Brian, somebody called the cops on Brian and specifically on him. But what this stranger saw was Brian slapping her in his car, in the van that they were in. And so they called the cops and said that this was happening.
Yeah.
So the cops show up to a call that is specifically, you know, this man was slapping this young woman. And what ensues is that the cops ultimately notice that Brian is more composed and Gabby is more, I use this word for lack of a better term, but seemingly hysterical.
Yeah, distraught.
Distraught definitely would be a better word, yes. Yeah. I just mean to say that because it seems that that's how they took it.
Yeah.
And it created in their mind the impression that she was the abuser and that he was the victim, because I think he had scratch marks on his face or something like that, which came out sort of obviously later that she was defending herself against his physical aggression toward her. So again, when we talk about warning signs, now you could talk a little bit more about this too, about exactly what happened in that when they pulled them over. But it does seem very clear that they missed a ton of warning signs.
Yeah, yeah. So just bringing it back to the friend for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So you had mentioned that Gabby was crying hysterically, very distraught. She was like that when she was pulled over by the cops. But her friend actually noticed that she had been like that before this had happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like she had known that when her and Brian were arguing, she would get like this, just really, really sad, distraught crying. And that's kind of another warning sign in itself, right? Because if somebody that you know is all of a sudden like acting different, they're not acting like themselves, they're so upset over an argument with their partner that they can't even breathe, that's a warning sign, because you don't know that something deeper could be going on that's causing them to be like that.
That's right.
So it's also important to like notice that if there are changes in your friend's behavior, that's something to look out for, because that might mean that something's not okay with them or in their relationship in general. And so when she was pulled over by the cops, she kind of presented the same way. And yeah, I agree. A lot of missed warning signs there, and kind of a missed opportunity to bare minimum do some safety planning with her, because that could have been really beneficial.
And they, speaking of her behavior in the moment, what Gabby told the police was, "I'm sorry, I have a lot of anxiety and OCD," and I think that Brian ultimately verified that by saying it as well. But what I'm saying is, they brought up her mental illness. I say that in quotes, as if that was something of a suspicion that she might have been the abuser. I don't know if that's how you took it too, but it's like, it does seem like there was an overemphasis on OCD and anxiety, meaning that she might be abusive. But those two things don't really go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, they did mention that several times. Oh, you have anxiety? Like, is something going on with your OCD? First of all, just because someone is diagnosed with OCD or anxiety doesn't at all mean they're going to be an abuser or be a victim for that sense. Mental health diagnoses are not do not go hand in hand with being in an abusive relationship or being an abuser. So I think that's really important to know. Lots of people have mental health struggles and they don't go on to hurt other people. So that's really important to know. And I think just the fact that they kept bringing it up, it's almost like, looking to kind of like place blame for how she was presenting. But again, like that has nothing to do with it. I mean, that's just, she was obviously upset because of what was going on in her relationship.
Right.
And so, yeah, that was definitely.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, that's like, why is this anxiety acting up?
Right.
Why is this anxiety coming out in this way?
Absolutely.
That didn't seem to be called into question. In fact, one of the cops said, she needs to take a shower, like that kind of idea. Like she just needs to relax
like
instead of
right.
Which okay, it's just it felt very misunderstanding of why why this behavior would be occurring in the first place.
Absolutely.
I think another warning sign, it's hard to say. His composure in that moment felt very, I mean, we learned that it was, but very controlling of the narrative, controlling of like trying to manipulate the cops to some degree. Like, no, I'm the composed one,
Yeah.
And that feels like a tactic that's not only used in defense in a moment like that, which is that he could have been in a lot of trouble, but throughout the relationship, that it's a gaslighting thing, toward the victim, that she making her feel crazy, making her feel that having OCD or having anxiety is something that it's her fault and she's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It seems like probably a dynamic that was existing in the relationship the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually something that society still does a lot of in general, is like looking for a reason why victims of abuse might present as being crazy, but they're not. Half of the time it's just a response to the trauma that they've already endured.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Again, like nothing to do with how she responded. One other thing about his composure, which is interesting, actually, our boss Allison brought this up, was that at some point he said something like, "Oh, I hope she's not saying bad things about me." Like he was just trying so hard to know that she wasn't saying anything bad about him, but just trying to control the narrative, because like God forbid she said something bad about him, and meanwhile he's like talking about her OCD and all these things.
He said that to the cops. He said, "I hope she's not saying anything bad about me."
Yes.
Like joking, like kind of being like
sort of jokey.
Yeah, right.
But like it's just interesting that was his priority.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Oh man, yeah. That's interesting. I mean, there's other instances in it. Like he gets in the cop car. First of all, he was put in a domestic violence shelter. She was told to stay in the van.
Yes.
This is a whole other story. But when he got into the cop car, like they start talking about music together. They start talking. It's like just very like it. If he seemed genuinely concerned about like her, would have been, why is she staying in the van? I can't really have her staying in the van,
Right.
Or I'm not really here to talk about music. I'm really like like, what are your feelings in that moment? And so everything just felt very like, so I just think bringing it back to, what could we do? How do we see these warning signs, obviously before things get bad?
Yeah.
What would you suggest for friends of people in abusive relationships? Because it's really hard to have that conversation.
Totally.
And like, the kind of friendship that they had, you want to say that that's like, it was such a rock. It really felt like they really had a very, very like just solid relationship, and they did. There's nothing. I'm just saying, if somebody already has that, what can they do? What can they, like, how could they address this?
Yeah. First of all, you want to let your friend know that you are there for them unconditionally.
Yeah.
That's kind of how you want to start the conversation. Like, look, you're my friend. I'm just concerned because I'm seeing whatever it is. And you want to be specific about abusive behavior. So in this case, Brian seemed to be very controlling. So a friend of Gabby's might have said something like, look, that's actually emotional abuse. Like, somebody who's really controlling over your every move. Him taking your wallet's financial abuse. And plant the seed that's what's happening is abuse, and that someone who loves someone doesn't abuse them. You don't want to say, like, you should just break up with them. It's simple, just break up. Because there are so many barriers to leaving an abusive relationship, this could be a podcast in itself, but really dangerous to leave an abusive relationship. And so it's important that you don't say those types of statements. You don't want to ask the victim if what they did to provoke this. There's nothing a victim can do that could provoke an abusive response. And just let them know that you're there for them. Encourage them to tell somebody. And if you're underage, encourage them to tell an adult, or you tell an adult if something is really concerned, if you're really concerned about your friend's safety. And so those are just some really, good things to do. Refer them to hotlines. I think the biggest lessons we can learn from all of this is safety planning. And I've mentioned this a couple times.
You can't mention it enough.
Exactly. It's really like the most important lesson that we talk about in PowerBack too. Safety planning can literally save people's lives. Yeah. And it's literally just things that you can do to keep yourself safe, whether you're in an abusive relationship, planning on leaving, or you've already left. So we know that Gabby was likely going to break up with Brian, right? And so if the police officer or her friend had a conversation about ways to keep herself safe during that breakup process, or even helped her get away from him safely, things might have been different. And of course, we'll never know, but safety planning really does, again, save people's lives. And so, like, some things you could do to safety plan might be coming up with a password or a passcode with friends that are going to answer the phone when things feel dangerous. Avoid being alone with that person if you can. Of course, another piece of this is that Gabby was really isolated from him. She had nobody around in her corner, at all. Yeah. So that's what also kind of made this even more tragic, because, she didn't have friends or family around.
If I can, because she traveling the country and becoming a vlogger it was her dream. I mean, she had talked about that with her ex-boyfriend, and they talked about that at some point in the documentary. And I think it probably became hard for the family to say, well, what's happening is he's isolating you, because this was her dream to go do this, and he was doing it with her. But it all aided in that,
100%.
And so if someone's going to go away with someone or going to be isolated with someone, and that's their choice, then that's one thing. But if it is further aiding in what you can see as just someone becoming more and more isolated from their friends, their family, any of their support systems at all, that would be a really clear way to tell someone, this is what's happening right now, that they're taking you from people that will help you.
Right.
And they're putting a wedge through you, whatever you call it. Yeah. That's what was happening. I mean, that's essentially what did happen, and it just became, and so the safety plan in that becomes so much harder, obviously, because how do you help her? That nobody could reach her, and it was, where do you go? So anyway, that was the really tragic part of it, for sure.
Yeah, right. It just, it made things harder, like in the investigation too. Yeah, it's that might be the one time that location sharing might be helpple if you're if you're that somebody's dangerous to you and you're going to an isolated place from them, maybe somebody else, making sure at least to see where you are. Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, you can also always like pre-program 911 into your phone, call 911, of course, if you ever feel in danger at all. But yeah, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot that would have, changed that scenario again because of the isolation, I think.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, I
Yeah.
think that's good for today.
Yeah.
Thank you for talking about this.
No,
It's
thank
really,
you.
if anybody has any questions about the documentary or about what we talked about, please
Yeah.
reach out to us, hit us up. We're happy to talk about it. It can be triggering to watch it. I should probably say that in the beginning, but it's hard to watch. It's hard to grapple with these things, but I think that most people will come out of something like this at least with the hope, thinking, what can we do to change things, to prevent, to further educate ourselves, just to have the communication tools, just so that your friends can talk to one another, that you can, safely. I don't want to go on too long. I just wanted to say one other thing, which was that like it becomes really hard to not distance yourself from friends who won't take your advice or won't leave someone who's in an abusive relationship and stuff. And that I don't actually even know if this was in the documentary. I forget if the friend had any contention like this, but as we talk about it, it just reminds me that it sometimes makes you want to leave a friendship if they're not listening to you or not taking your advice, or, just going off and continue, like I don't want to say allowing the abuse to continue, because it's not an allowance, but it's like perceived that way by the friend if they're not taking their advice, right? So it's like, just understand that leaving the friendship is just eroding that support system.
Yeah.
That they might not have much else of,
I'm really glad you brought that up, because that comes up all the time in forums. People are like, I'm just so frustrated. I've talked to my friend about this 10 times and they're still not leaving their partner. First of all, it takes an average of 7 times to leave an abusive relationship, because again, really hard. There might be, feelings of love involved. It's very complicated to leave abusive relationships. And so I think it's okay to like set boundaries if it's becoming too much for you as a friend to try to, help their friend that's in an abusive relationship. But it's really important not to drop the friendship, because if your friend knows that you will always be there for them no matter what, when they're ready to leave for good, you will be the person that they call.
Yes.
So really, it's a really good point.
Yeah, really well said. All right, we got to wrap things up. Okay. But thank you everybody for watching.